Pictures of people like you and I. You see the brotherhood at power. If you go into the city in Harare now, there are big pictures that says President Idi welcomes you. That's the image that you have. We all become invisible. So SADC shouldn't be about brother. And the SADC People's Summit's point is that we are the people, and they need to focus on what do the people want. Capacity and expertise. It's not like we don't have resources. Billions of dollars go into Zimbabwe's electoral process. But where is it going? Where is it going? Billions go into African elections. But where is it going? Where is it going? It disappears in places that do not strengthen the people's voice, people's participation. He spoke about electoral management, support for conflict prevention, and a lot of all those things. And he did speak about some of the tools that we have in the SADC region. We had a report in different spots. My brother Hietavo will speak about the elections in SADC, in Eswatini, in Swaziland, where SADC also produced a report. But before I go there, I want to invite Tony Rila to, within the next 5 minutes, reflect on some of the tools and mechanisms that are already available within the SADC region that we could make use of.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. As the oldest person in the room, I'm pretty sure that I've seen a lot of elections, and I must say, in my life, from 1951 in this country, very few elections ever solve problems. They seem to create more problems. My task here, and I know people can't see this, and I need to do notes, is to reflect on SADC. People said in the beginning, what should SADC do? And my response to them is, do your job. Now, why do I say that? SADC is formed by a treaty. A treaty is a legal relationship between countries. It implies rights and responsibilities. And they're defined. They're defined in the SADC treaty. And I want to refer to this because when you talk about building a pact, you have to build a pact against what is there that you can use. Right? It's not SADC's not a birthday party invitation for people to come along every now and again. It's built in a treaty, in protocols. Now, if you can just flip the next slide. Okay, no, forget that one. I'll make sure these people everybody gets this. In the treaty, there are principles that members of SADC must adhere to. That's your basis for being there. They are sovereign equality of all member states. Now, remember sovereignty, because it's a word we get used a lot here, right? Solidarity, peace, and security, right? Good, right? All nations in SADC are equal. Seychelles is as powerful as the United States. Peace, security, and solidarity. We've got some problems about solidarity. Human rights, democracy, and rule of law. That's very fundamental. I want you to keep that in your head because that has very important implications for elections. Equity, balance, and mutual benefit. It was supposed to be also a developmental community. We were supposed to develop the region together. And finally, peaceful settlement of disputes. Now, these principles are there. Now, why are they there? Because if you hold on to those principles and you're a country who is legitimately part of SADC, then we expect you to adhere to these principles. Not just about elections, all the time, every day. Now, one of the important things is what happens, and just remember, elections do two things when they happen. Firstly, they create the legal basis for a government. In other words, somebody won and somebody gets elected. They also create legitimacy, and that is the key thing, is that the party elected to be government has the legitimate support of the people. That's why elections are important. Legitimacy and legality are not the same. Legitimacy is what we agree has been a free and fair output. I want to come back to that quickly. All right, what happens if you fail? Can we go to the next slide? SADC says in Article 33, if you behave badly, we can sanction you. Right? It's not just the Americans. SADC says if you fail, and if you fail, may be imposed against any member state that persistently fails without good reason to fulfill obligations under this treaty. In other words, if you fail an election. And secondly, excuse me, implements policies which undermine the principles and objectives of the treaty. Now, that implies behavior across the continuum, not just in elections, but between elections. Okay, now I'll skip a lot of this. Now, what SADC did in 2005 around elections is they invented the principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. And specifically, democratic elections obey human rights, democracy, and rule of law. They go back to that principle in the treaty that say any election must obey those things. Okay? It's very explicit. And then they unravel all of that. I'm getting a bit lost. Can you just flip on a bit? Okay? Right? Now, we use these words free and fair. Free and fair are defined in the principles and guidelines really clearly, both of them. What is free and what is fair? Free talks to us, the rights we have, assembly, association, the right to vote. All of these basic freedoms entrenched in our Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, must be seen to be operating in an election. It's a test. If you go to an election and you do not see these boxes on freedoms being ticked, right, it failed free. Quite clearly. It's very simple. It's not difficult. You know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist like Jonathan Moyer to say, I can do this test. Fairness is also defined, and fairness is about the conduct of the election management body, the voters' roll, delimitation, all these kind of conditions. Now, again, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You go tick, 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 tick. Now, SADC, and they were wise. This was a good thing to do. In 2005, when they put these principles out and we were going to election, Thabo and Becky said, there will be consequences if they fail the test. Weren't many consequences, as I remember. Okay? But they failed the test in 2008, and what we got was a GNU. Okay? Now, also in 2005, a magical body emerged in SADC, the SADC Electoral Advisory Council. Anybody heard of that?
Yes.
Good. Because we don't know what it is and how it works. Okay? But they, in 2015, they specified the mandate of this body. Very important. It shall pay careful attention to elections, pre-election, during election, and post-election, to deal with the possibilities of conflict. Okay? Now, that's a broad term. So what we expect is SEAC, in the pre-election period, to be paying very careful attention to what's happening pre-elections. And when do pre-election processes start? The day after the last election, right? What happens in that period of 5 years is material for an election. So if in that period all your freedoms are being smashed, people are being locked up, political violence is happening, that is part of the pre-election assessment. Okay? So in that, they shall send a goodwill mission to the country to assess that. It doesn't say when, it says to observe conflict. I will tell you, SEAC came in April 2023. That's when the goodwill mission came. And what they said, we got no report from them, we get 3 paragraphs in the SADC Election Observer Mission final report. SEAC came between the 12th and 17th of April. They consulted various stakeholders. Okay? We don't have a report like missions usually do that say who they all interviewed. And in the end, they concluded that Zimbabwe was ready for elections. Okay? Some people raised it to do with intra-party conflict, is what they said. That's their summation. They then, they then obviously are supposed to be around after the election, during the election, and then if there's potential conflict, they must come back afterwards and do a formal review. Well, SEAC didn't come. Two bodies that we've never heard of, something called the SADC Ministerial, sorry, I don't have my slide here, led by the panel of elders and supported by a technical body in SADC, came in and out. Do you remember the panel of elders coming? Okay, well, yeah, we sort of heard they came and they went, okay, to no consequence. So, SEAC, then, we have to start thinking about what goes on. Now, and I want to use Zimbabwe very specifically here. There are a number of observations that you can make about Zimbabwe if you're in SEAC. Number one, it is indisputable that Zimbabwe is the most violent country in SADC when it comes to elections. There's no argument about that. The data says it's quite clear. So, bearing in mind that, the interregnum between 2018 and 2023 is very important to observe. Right? Let's get the stories. The by-elections, there was plenty of evidence coming out of intimidation and violence and all manner of irregularities. That was 2 years before the election. Right? That's very, very important to observe. Secondly, we got, let me just see if I can quickly, let's ignore these, we'll carry on. Down, right, okay. Second thing about Zimbabwe, every single election since 2000 has led to serious dispute. One of them was actually thrown out in 2008 because of the excessive violence. Every election has basically been marred by violence. And if you're SEAC and you're a clever observer and an informed observer, you know that what follows violence is political fear, and political fear creates the grounds for intimidation. So you do not need to coming into a country in Zimbabwe just to look for bodies on the street. Go out and find out where the intimidation is happening. As my good friend Derek Matashek used to say, if they burnt your house once, next time just wave the matches, you'll obey. Right? That evidence is there. It's absolutely there. Thirdly, they came in in April. For 2 years, civil society, human rights groups had been reporting that there are serious issues around political violence and intimidation. There's endless reports on that, okay? Quite clearly. They also, civil society points out to them that election political violence happened immediately after the election. After voting closed, people were being hunted and displaced. This was notorious. We knew, young women were dragged out of places and beaten and raped because they were polling agents. I mean, this is not assertion, this is a fact. So SADC and SEOM had every reason to see that there was conflict. And they had observed conflict over the polling and all the games that went on that place. So all of those were indicators that conflict was going to come. SEAC? No. Panel of elders discreetly talking to who we don't know. Okay? And latest reports, Zimright's latest report, qualitative report, says we corroborate from the voices of people what was there in the quantitative reports. The election was a horror show. It failed the tests in every single way. Now, and SEAC and SEOM and SADC have all the tools in the world to prepare for an election, to monitor it. Not 3 months or 4 months before an election, but over the 5 years. How is this country, which is, according to all SADC criteria and objective evidence, in the same company as Swaziland and the DRC? That's how bad we are on every objective measure of democracy. We're the skunks of the region. Okay? So the questions are, these questions remain, and you have to think about this. The first thing that you say when you're building a pact is, the first word is, SADC, do your damn job. The tools are there, you just have to do what you're supposed to do, right? Measure it properly, scrutinize it properly, and don't come along before the election and say, gosh, you've got nice new roads and everything looks fine. And we spoke to people and they all said it's going to be all right. Well, who did you speak to? Well, we spoke to Minister X, Minister Y, Minister G, etc., etc. We tried to get a meeting with Mr. Chamisa and we had a short meeting with him. That's who they consulted. They didn't wander the streets ahead of time and interview you and you and you and you and say, how do you feel about these things? They didn't do that. They go to talk to their mates. So first question, okay, is, where is the SEAC report? Right, they came. They don't give you 3 paragraphs, they give us a report of who they spoke to and how they conducted their assessment pre-election. So accountability, we can say, did you do the job or didn't you? Okay. Second point, where is the CIOM report? I want to take you back to Article 33. If you persistently fail to meet the standards and the principles of SADC, there shall be our consequences. Where's the consequence? None. Did Zimbabwe pass the test of free? I think civil society and all observers have said fail. Total fail. All those rights were failed. Right? Not difficult. Don't have to be a brain scientist. Did we pass the test of fairness? Answer, no. Right? Everybody, even the observer reports, commented how badly ZEC did its job. Right? Everybody. So we failed the test of free and fair, which means we failed under the principles and guidelines. And that means we failed on the election. The government is illegitimate. It might be legal because they were sworn in, but it's illegitimate. Now what does SADC do? That's my question. And not just now about Zimbabwe, what do they do about the reality? And that's why I entitled this chat, Rhetoric and Reality. Because what SADC gives us is rhetoric, and what we get is the reality. And if you want these details, I'll make sure the PowerPoint gets circulated to all of you. You can also watch it on SAPI's YouTube. Thank you very much.
The real ideas are here, and the real solutions are here. So, thank you very much, Tony. And I think I will be inviting Grace to join me in a moment. We have had the 2 main presentations to set us on a reflection on the SADC People's Electoral Pact. And I think from Tony's conversation, we already have a lot of the tools in place. But what we are failing to find is the political will to implement and put those in practice. And when Tony says what we get is rhetoric, that's the brother thing. And what we get is the reality, that's the violence, that's the conflicts, that's the despair that we begin to see. Now, and I want us to begin to think about, to imagine on what we actually want as opposed to what we have. Many times when you are in the mud, it's difficult to imagine a different reality. I think there is stark contrast between what we saw happening in Zambia and what we saw happening in Swaziland. And I think as we begin to have this conversation, we will invite Laura to reflect on what are some of the best practices that we can learn from Zambia, our northern neighbors. No system is perfect, but to a great extent, a lot of members from SADC have looked at Zambia with great admiration. And also Thabo will then help us reflect on the challenges that they are facing in Swaziland and how we can resolve those. But Dr. Rita here with us will also remind us to be inclusive in these conversations. But this is not a conversation that I am qualified to chair, so I will invite Grace to facilitate that conversation, which will ultimately lead us into the round tables on the People's Electoral Pact. Hands together for Grace.